peaceful country scene. Just the kind of setting, in fact, in which many people have had strange and disturbing confrontations with alien life forms.
She was witnessed floating out of a 12-story window in a blue beam of light, blue-white, underneath a large object with 3 small aliens, 1 above and 2 below.
So if then there are aliens somewhere, watching and waiting, could they be responsible for other unexplained mysteries?
And what would the motive be for 30 years, at least 30 years, of human abductions and animal mutilations?
The majority of us can only speculate on the possibility of visitors from another world. To fully accept the concept, the human mind must have corroborative evidence to substantiate the experiences of the minority. But maybe there is such evidence, withheld until now. Sightings reported each year, the majority of which can and are explained away by everyday happenings, but a small percentage are left unexplained. We asked Bud Hopkins, one of the world's foremost and well-respected experts on the UFO phenomena and author of several best-selling books on the subject, firstly how he became involved in the phenomena.
My involvement in all this came about not because of any curiosity. I thought the whole thing was had been explained by the Air Force as balloons or something, and I got involved in it because I had a daytime sighting in 1964, which lasted about 3 minutes, and I was with 2 other people, and a daytime sighting with something flying around gets your attention, and that's what got me into it.
Another of America's experts, Linda Howe, award-winning documentary filmmaker, talks to us about another phenomena, animal mutilation, something that has been around for years and is thought to be connected to the UFO experience.
Well, I did my graduate work at Stanford University in California, and I got a master's degree in communications specializing in documentary films. And from 68 to 78, all of my work was in science, medicine, and the environment. And in the fall of 79, I was in Colorado, and there were newspaper headlines in Canada, many western states, Midwest states, all at the same time, reporting a phenomenon that from photograph to photograph looked like this. When you look at, over 14 years in my case now, several hundred photographs that look like this, 360-degree circle of flesh taken around the eyeball removed, in some cases the optic nerve is removed right into the center of the brain. This jaw, which some people might think is normal, but this is something that a predator could do or that a human could do. I have interviewed veterinarians, pathologists, about how difficult is it to get the tissue cleanly off of a jaw of a cow. And the answer is, it is nearly impossible unless you boil it off for hours. And yet, case after case, in the West, Canada, and other parts of the world, animals have been found just like this, including missing teeth, jawbone removed, the jaw flesh completely removed, and yet this particular animal that I'm showing you here was warm to touch when the sheriff got to this animal. That means that this animal was dead only 10 to 12 hours. Case after case, all the way up to 1993 in Alabama, and now about 8 states in the United States, other provinces in Canada, England, Germany, we're getting stories of animal mutilations here. This same face, head of a cow, is reported over and over and over again. The first case was in 1967, and now it's 1993. It means we're coming up into the 3rd decade of a phenomenon that has tracked in parallel the UFO abduction syndrome. My own personal opinion, after getting into this, trying to find out what could be going on in the environment, that would cause animals worldwide to end up looking exactly the same, country to country to country, with no blood, no tracks, animals being found on wet sandbars, snow, mud, and no tracks, not even their own around them. That is what led law enforcement right from the beginning at the end of the 60s to start looking up to the sky, saying, there's only one way this animal was put on this wet sandbar. It had to be from above down. And in 1993, it's the same dilemma. Law enforcement is frustrated by the lack of evidence. There's no tracks, there's no blood, and yet the phenomenon continues, associated with lights in the sky.
We saw a small lens-shaped object like this, apparently hovering. Clouds would blow between us and it. We were in a moving car. Sometimes the cloud would be behind it and silhouetted. Clouds were moving fast and it was stable. And at one point, it was kind of swallowed up by the cloud. So it looked like a dark silhouette, like a ship in the fog. And as we got closer to it on lower ground, it was circular from underneath. And we speculated and carried on, and finally I was driving very slowly and looking out the window. We passed it, and all of a sudden it went, phew, and it passed by us directly into the wind, which eliminated any kind of balloon theory or whatever. And I hit the brakes, and we all jumped out, and we said, my God, that was one of those flying saucers you used to hear about. This is 1964. Gets your attention.
Daylight sightings, lights in the sky. But is there any firm evidence to connect the animal mutilations with these lights in the sky or aliens?
The whole issue of is there any hard evidence that would connect the animal mutilations to something from beyond our planet, a non-human life form, is the frustrating thing for all of us. We would like harder and harder proof, and what we have largely is circumstantial eyewitness testimony. There is one point that I think we should make. This, for example, is a photograph from Minnesota in 1974. There were 60-some circles in a pasture, and there was a heifer found right in the middle of one of these, cut. Eye missing, ear missing, tongue removed, jaw stripped, just like the other photograph from Colorado. Law enforcement has always puzzled when they found the animal inside of a circle in a pasture. This is not an isolated case. Especially if there are no tracks around the animal, it suggests that whatever made the circle and put the animal there did that from above. Now, so you could say that starting in the 60s when the phenomenon began, tracking through the 70s and the 80s, law enforcement has always been looking up. Sometimes looking for helicopters, sometimes they don't know. But there have been football field, 300 feet diameter orange glowing lights associated with mutilations right from the beginning. There have been law enforcement deputy sheriffs traveling together in a car, and they have seen an orange glowing light the size of a full moon rise right up from a hill near them, split into two. One go south, one go north, waiting to see what happened next and see the two orange full moons come back together and go straight down in what looked like going into the earth. In 1980 to around 1983, there were a whole series of events that would, from my point of view, would fall into the whole category of first-hand eyewitness testimony. For my work as a journalist, now 22 years, I have been doing all kinds of medical, science, and environmental programs. It's been my experience that when you are dealing in any kind of a story, it's the rare case where somebody is lying or distorting. For the most part, I have found that people really struggle to report exactly what it is that they saw. In 1980, a rancher, morning, sunlight, totally conscious, out rounding up cows in a remote part of his Texas ranch, comes around some mesquite trees and sees what he said were two creatures, a about 4 feet tall, big black slanted eyes, heads shaped like eggs with the pointed end down. He said they were moving sort of robot-like, and swinging between them was a cat. The rancher was terrified and ran immediately from the spot. His son is the one who called me because I had done the documentary A Strange Harvest by then. And the son called to tell me and report what his father finally, after 3 days, got up the courage to tell his own family. And he took the son and he took the wife back to that spot where he had seen these creatures carrying the cat. And there was the cat, or you might say, the hide of the cat. It had every organ, every bone, all muscle tissue was gone. The calf had been turned inside out with the head intact and the hooves intact and folded into an odd sort of package on the ground. And next to it was the spine of the calf, and every rib had been removed. And that rancher, who was in his 70s when this happened in 1980, he asked me, he said, who or what would do this and why? And that has been the question and the theme that has haunted law enforcement and journalists and myself now for a long time.
So have we now established that we are dealing with a non-human life form? If so, just what is it they are looking for?
I think we know a great deal now about what's going on based on the patterns that keep occurring in these cases. Whoever or whatever the UFO occupants are, they seem to be extremely interested in studying us on the physical level, human reproduction, our DNA, the way on the emotional level we treat one another in sexual or loving relationships, friendships, but most especially how we treat our children. And it seems to be, even though this sounds totally crazy, that they are interested in producing some kind of hybrid mix of themselves and ourselves. And I know this sounds crazy, but this is what we get in case after case, and one has to deal with the data one way or another. But the implication is that it's as if they have gone by some point of no return in their evolution. And they need some kind of revivification or something which involves our DNA and some of the more primitive feelings we have just about the whole maternal and paternal sense we have of our children. And so they are concentrating on that. They're not interested in our technology or any of those other things, but what they seem to care most about is what's most primitive and in a certain sense most human about humans.
A very intriguing theory. But is it possible to tie animal mutilations and human abductions together?
After 14 years, I personally am convinced that there's enough evidence, even if it's circumstantial, that something that's non-human is involved with animal mutilations worldwide. And it's my personal opinion that the mutilations are one half of a phenomenon that over on this half is human abductions. In both of these, tissue and fluid are removed. In the humans, sperm, ova, some surface tissue can be removed, sometimes fluid, amniotic fluid. In the animals, tissue is taken from ears, eyes, the tongue, the genitals, the rectal area, and internal organs. On the humans are returned to their daily lives, generally with what's called missing time. They have amnesia. They were on a road. Something happens, they get home 2 hours late, but they don't remember. The only thing they've got is a clock staring at them that they should have been home 2 hours earlier, and they don't know what happened. The animals are found dead. The same material, in a way, is being taken, but the humans seem to be handled quite differently. It is as if whatever is intruding upon our planet is making a distinction between humans and the rest of the animal life on the planet. Now, a lot of people have asked me, if we're dealing with an intelligence that's capable of lifting an 1,800-pound bull, assuming that they're lifted in a beam of light, which is other eyewitnesses have seen, out of a pasture, and that abductees say they also are lifted in beams of light and returned in beams of light, so it's the same technology, essentially. Then, what about humans? Could humans be subjected to what is happening in the animals? And my answer is that both phenomena began in the 60s, at least in terms of being reported. It may have been going on earlier, but the 60s is where we essentially say the modern world of this began. There have been rumors out of South America. There have been rumors out of the jungles of Vietnam about people being found, again, bloodless with these excisions. But to this date, I have never seen what I would consider to be any hard medical evidence whatsoever that whatever this phenomenon is, that it has affected humans the way it has the animals.
So these aliens mean us no harm. If that is the case, then why are they here? Let's now look at a recent abduction case which Bud Hopkins is investigating and seems to suggest a possible new reason for an abduction.
We have what seems to be an deliberate alien display of an abduction for the benefit of an important political figure who was a witness to this. And I have dealt with now, this whole complex case, which is amazing, and it's gone on and on. And one of the most important developments in the case happened on Saturday, this past Saturday. In the past year, there were two other extraordinarily important developments. This is an ongoing case which involves large numbers of people. And on the witness side that I've been dealing with, 13 different people were witnesses to aspects of the case. But essentially, crucially, she was witnessed floating out of a 12-story window in a blue beam of light, blue-white, underneath a large object with three small aliens, one above and two below. And she was then floated up into the craft. Linda herself consciously remembered part of the abduction. Under hypnosis, remembered floating out the window, but being rigid and unable to move her head or do anything, so she didn't see anything above her or below her, at least in terms of figures. But the woman who saw this whole thing from the Brooklyn Bridge, this is 3:15 in the morning, was absolutely certain that somebody was making a movie. She said the idea of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs went through her mind. And she thought, well, everything happens in New York. They're making a movie, but why did my car stop? And why did the lights all go out? And why did the other cars behind her stop? There must have been 4 or 5 cars on the bridge at that hour whose engines all stopped, who all witnessed the same thing. People behind her in the car were screaming, my God, there are people floating in the air. But this particular incident was evidently staged for the benefit of an important political figure in a car on the ground with 2 government agents with him who all witnessed the same thing. I can't go into the details about identities and my involvement with these people, which is extreme. And because my hope is that these people will spontaneously and voluntarily come forward and admit what they saw, which would change the world if it so happened. When I say change the world, it would change the world to the extent the world would be changed if, let's say, a former Secretary of Defense of the United States, like Robert McNamara, for instance, would say, I have seen the bodies that are held by our people at the Air Force. That would have, there would be people who say McNamara is lying or McNamara is crazy, but still the authenticity of that kind of statement would be analogous to the authenticity here. It would make it infinitely more difficult for people to put this down, especially with the number of other witnesses.
One of the main weapons in the investigator's armoury is hypnosis. While some people think that this is a flawed way to research, others suggest that it is the only way to reach that part of the memory that has been deliberately blocked.
Conscious memory, well, it all starts with conscious memory. We often use hypnosis to help flesh out the memory, but many people remember the whole thing without hypnosis. Some people need hypnosis to help them remember some of the parts that have been, it would seem to be deliberately blocked by the UFO abductees. But the accounts are extraordinarily similar. For instance, recently, I was dealing with a German engineer who was doing investigations in Germany on abductions, and he showed me some drawings of some symbols that one of his abductees had seen inside a UFO. Now, these would be a notational system. And I said, I've got 30 exactly like that. And he was, of course, totally shocked because fantasy would produce symbols all over the place. But if you're actually all seeing the same thing, then the inescapable conclusion is these are real experiences.
Real experiences. Just how credible are the witnesses? Travis Walton, probably the most famous abductee, has been subjected over the years to all kinds of tests, but no one has been able to disprove his experience.
Actually, from the time I found myself on the road outside of Heber, until the regressive hypnosis, I remembered most of what came out under hypnosis. The main thing that was accomplished by the hypnosis was to allow me to recall these memories without just breaking down. That was the first time that I'd been able to relate this to anyone.
Travis was asked and took several lie detector tests along with the other witnesses. Just what was the outcome?
As far as the polygraph test that the 6 crewmen underwent from the state police, that testing actually took all day, and I think there was 3 or 4 series of tests for each individual. They go entirely through the series of questions 3 or 4 times. And as far as my own polygraph testing, there was an attempt to have one in just a couple of days after this happened, and I was still, in incredibly psychological condition.
Was that the one with Jack McCarthy?
Yes. And, that test has been was declared completely invalid by the psychiatrists that were in attendance at that time and by a number of nationally known polygraph experts since then. But I, since that time, have undergone and passed 3 separate polygraph tests under the most rigorous conditions and passed them all.
It would appear that not all abduction cases involve just one person. We put this point to Bud Hopkins to see if his investigations were finding the same thing.
They're often involving many more than one. I've got 2 cases involving 7 simultaneous people taken simultaneously. Now, in one of the cases I've worked with recently, 3 people I know slightly from a support group in New York, who know one another slightly, remembered details of a quote-unquote dream of a certain kind of space, describing a lift and many, many people being processed. We don't know exactly why or how. They're all naked. Now, the 3 people remembered seeing one another and were extremely upset by these recollections. Under hypnosis, well, because they don't know one another, as an example, I asked one woman if when she was facing another woman she knows, if she noticed any physical marks on the other woman's body. And she described the woman having a very long abdominal scar at the bikini line. And when I checked with that woman, in fact, she had a bladder operation as a teenager, and she has a scar in that place. Each one of the 3 described certain features of the other 2 absolutely accurately. These people don't know one another very well at all. They don't very slightly. So we get many cases where the many people taken simultaneously, so I said 2 cases with 7 people, and the descriptions match in virtually every detail. It's almost as common to get more than one person taken simultaneously than just one.
So is this then the solid evidence we are looking for on abductions?
It certainly eliminates the idea of fantasy in these cases. And of course, what happens when the person comes back, is brought back, there's a huge gash down the back of the leg, and to put together some of the anomalies, the woman's abducted wearing a nightgown, and she comes back and she's wearing a man's t-shirt, and there's no nightgown ever found, and there's, let's say, a cut down the back of her leg, which is 3 inches long, and there's no blood on sheets, on body or anything. And let's say she comes to on the floor in the living room instead of in her bedroom, and she lives alone, and she has a memory of having been on a table in X, Y, and Z. There are too many physical things that support the reality of the experience for anybody to look at it calmly and say, oh, well, it must be just the imagination. We want to believe that, and this is an important thing about the theories. Nobody wants this to be true, especially the abductees. Nobody is comfortable with it. Everybody would rather come up with some kind of psychological theory or something to explain it away, to keep it at arm's length. This is the most disturbing kind of information that anybody can contain in their heads. And certainly for society, the implications are as difficult as anything one could imagine. If true, this is the biggest event in all of human history. And it's much easier for us to kind of say, well, there must be some explanation. It's only this and only that.
Linda Howe also comes up with some very interesting ideas on abductions and a theory about the greys and their large eyes.
The more deeply that I researched abductions, looking at abductions as being one side of what I think is a phenomenon that also involves the animal mutilations, I have heard from abductees, not many, but a few, who seem to have had some kind of communication about why the animal mutilations are happening. And it is as if the abductees have been taken by some kind of non-human being, creature, that has knowledge about the mutilations. In one case, a mother and daughter actually, the mother saw the excisions happening, the daughter saw the excised parts in a two-person abduction. So it was in Texas in 1973. They both now have been hypnotized. The details are both saw a calf going up in a beam of light. The mother sees two approximately 4-foot tall gray beings with large eyes, but not solid black. They were a light pupil here, and they had a dark vertical pupil, and both the mother and daughter said it looked like a snake. The beings were identically dressed in what appeared to be a gray, tight leotard, which matched their skin. Hard to tell the difference between the skin and the leotard. And in this particular case, they had some kind of tight skull cap or something on the head. All gray, but with these big eyes that look like a snake. And otherwise, the flat face that's become known as, quote-unquote, the gray. That case has always made me wonder if the black, big black things that are drawn could be some kind of shield. That we may be dealing with some kind of a life form, that our particular frequency of light is not compatible with whatever they are, and that they have shields. Maybe they move in and out of many different solar systems. None of us really know. And that they know how to enter different environments that are actually alien to wherever they come from, but they know how to adapt themselves. These are things that we don't know, but let's assume for the moment that what the mother and daughter saw in terms of beings, in the one case, the mother, two beings that look identical, that are literally physically excising tissue from testicles, from eye, from tongue of a calf, and then the daughter sees more parts laid out as if she's taken to one room in some environment and the mother's taken to another. If those two beings are any clue or insight to what we're dealing with, it's possible that the so-called gray, the word that is now used, may incorporate beings that actually underneath those big black eyes are these snake eyes. And many abductees also feel that the small grays, the 3.5-foot tall, that are more stout, some people have even referred to them as bellboys, saying they're here to take you where you need to go and bring you back, and outside of that, that's their program, implying that some of these beings are actually what we would call androids, biological, but literally programmed for specific tasks. Abductees also have a sense that whatever we're dealing with is hive-minded, much more like insects compared to us. In an ant colony, for example, there are very strict castes. Everybody has a role that appears to be what we're dealing with in terms of what the abductees report, a life form, unlike humans, that are very individual, very independent, very unpredictable. Whatever this alien world is, it's the opposite. It is hive-minded, it is cloned, everything looks the same, and things are programmed for certain tasks.
Let's now look at the subject of crashed retrievals. Most famous, of course, is Roswell. Was it a government cover-up, or was it a hoax? Bud Hopkins is in no doubt that it happened.
The crash retrieval issue, especially as focused on the Roswell incident in 1947, has no contradiction whatsoever to this. I mean, the descriptions of the alien bodies that were seen by various people who are still living seem to fit the descriptions we're getting from 3-year-olds today who have never heard about Roswell. We're describing as little tiny children, these figures in the room with the big black eyes, and they're small and they have big heads. I will often ask one of these children, trying to lead them, does the person have dark hair or light hair? I don't give them any option. And they'll say, there's no hair. And you know, when a child feels they are supposed to cooperate, they will give you whatever answer they expect you want. But anyway, the Roswell accounts of the bodies and the ships and so forth seem to actually is all very mutually supportive.
Do governments hide facts and put up smoke screens so the public are kept in the dark as to what is going on? Linda Howe has an experience that may shed some light on the subject, and if we are to believe what she was shown, then there can be no doubt that a massive cover-up has been going on.
In April of 1983, April 9th, I was taken on to Kirtland Air Force Base by an Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent named Richard C. Doty. This meeting was set up by a lawyer named Peter Gersten from New York, who had done all of the court filings under the Freedom of Information Act for the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. He had been corresponding with this AFOSI agent, Doty. When I began my documentary work for Home Box Office, he said, I can set up a meeting with Richard Doty at Kirtland. He has information about an alleged UFO landing at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota at the end of the 70s. He says he has some witnesses. If you can go to Albuquerque, get the names of those witnesses, Citizens Against UFO Secrecy will come out to South Dakota. We'll investigate the case, and you can cover it in your documentary. All straightforward. Everything seemed absolutely logical. So I go to the meeting. I think I'm there to get witness names about this alleged UFO landing in South Dakota. And the first thing that Richard Doty said to me in this office inside the AFOSI building, on the premises of one of the most classified bases in the United States, Kirtland Air Force Base, where we develop our high-tech military stuff. He said, that documentary that you did, meaning A Strange Harvest, upset some people in Washington. They don't want animal mutilations and UFOs connected together in the public's mind. And I remember being momentarily stunned at the implication of what he was saying to me. He was basically confirming that what I had done in the documentary was absolutely correct, but that the government did not want the public to know it. And when we sat down to talk about Ellsworth, South Dakota, it wasn't nearly as interesting as when he reached over into a drawer in the desk, pulled out an envelope, and as he did so, he said, my superiors have asked me to show this to you. And he reached into this envelope and he pulled out pages, and I was sitting near the corner of the desk. He said, as he handed me the pages, he said, you can read this, but you can't take notes, and I want you to move from the chair that you're sitting in to the chair there. And he motioned to a chair that was literally in the middle of this huge office. It didn't make any sense. And at the time, I was so confused with what was happening, it never occurred to me that I was moving to a chair where I would be both videotaped and audiotaped for my reaction to what I was going to read, which is what happened, but I didn't know that at the time. And as I'm moving from chair to chair and I'm looking at the top page, all caps, very formal briefing paper for the President of the United States of America on the subject of identified aerial vehicles. I've come to see that many times now. Identified aerial vehicles, IAVs, not UFOs. UFOs is unidentified flying object. Our government in the United States has been dealing with identified aerial vehicles for a long time. And when I turned the page, the top of the next page started a history of how our government in the United States had retrieved silver discs from various locations in the southwestern United States and from a location in northern Mexico, the nation of Mexico. And from these discs, we had retrieved bodies, both dead and at least one alive. And the rest of the paper that I was reading was about this one live, and in the paper it referred to it as extraterrestrial, and what our government had learned about its civilization and its relationship to ours. One of the paragraphs that I remember that shocked me at the time was it said that these extraterrestrials have manipulated DNA in already evolving primates on this planet. I took the implication to mean that whatever life we have now had something to do with the manipulation of DNA by these extraterrestrials long ago. Very reminiscent of Nobel Prize winning biologist Francis Crick's hypothesis that because we have only one DNA structure on this planet for all life forms, that it made more sense to him as a biologist that life was planted here from somewhere else, already full-blown and formed. And here I'm reading this paper in April of 1983 that is essentially implying that.
If these documents were so classified, then why was Linda, a documentary filmmaker, picked as the person to see them?
I said, after I went through this startling paper, it had much more in it. It said that we had been in communication with these beings on somewhat a formal basis since April 25th of 1964, that we had research projects that was dealing with the technology of the craft that we had retrieved, that we had a Project Aquarius that was accumulating all the information from these retrieved discs and from this live alien, and that was being applied to the United States space program. And I said to him at one point, I said, why are you showing me this? Why aren't you talking with 60 Minutes or the New York Times or the Washington Post? Why me, independent documentary filmmaker? And he said, because those other media, I guess you would say, were on a list the government didn't like. Well, that would be naive to assume that that was the correct answer. My own feeling at the time, and it's never changed, was I had done a documentary, A Strange Harvest, that apparently did touch into material that our government did not want people to know about. I'm working for CBS affiliate in Denver. I think I came out of left field. I don't think they ever expected anybody to devote a 90-minute television special to animal mutilations connected to alien life forms, because the government has successfully used ridicule for almost 50 years to keep everybody from making the link. The difference was that by 1979 to 80, when I did the documentary, I'd already had 10 years under my belt. I'd already won too many awards. I had a National Emmy nomination. I had regional Emmys. I had Sigma Chi journalism for excellence in journalism. I had too much background that was coming from a total, credible, mass-awarded environment, science, and medicine that when I did a strange harvest, out of my own personal curiosity of what could be happening to these animals worldwide, I wasn't somebody that could just be, well, it was a serious story, and I don't think the government ever expected any serious journalist to take on the subject. So now, in '83, 3 years after the broadcast of my documentary, I'm sitting across from a man inside of one of the most sensitive Air Force bases in the United States, basically confirming for me that my documentary is on the right track, showing me a briefing paper like this, telling me that they want now to release film to me to include in my documentary because they feel that the time had come for people to know that we were dealing with another life form.
Absolutely fascinating. At least we know the Americans are attempting to hide the facts in the name of national security.
My reaction to when he said that these other media that are well established and national were not liked by the government, and therefore he was showing me this and I was going to get this release, my thought in my mind was, no. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker who does not have access to large legal backup and the strength of deep-pocketed institutions. Essentially, he could show me anything that he wanted to show me. And if I went out and spoke, they could discredit me any way they wanted to, and I would have no way to fight it. And that is precisely why I never said a word about this entire episode that I'm telling you for 2 full years. I never said anything because I felt that I was being easily marked to be set up. Now the irony is that by 1987 in June, that would be 4 years after Doty showed me that briefing paper, a man named William Moore released at a Mutual UFO Network conference in Washington, D.C. in June of that year, the so-called now famous Eisenhower document that introduced MJ-12 and introduced the whole so-called retrieval of a crash disk at Roswell, the creation under Truman of a special study group in 1947 to deal with the crashing of disks, the retrieval of bodies, and an entire government coming to the conclusion, as is stated in the Eisenhower document, that in the interests of national security of the United States, it was mandatory to put on a policy of silence to prevent public panic. It's stated in the Eisenhower paper.
While in production of this video, we received some footage thought to be taken at the time of the Roswell crash. Whether it is genuine or not, we don't know, but thought it interesting enough to include, and have left it to you to make up your own mind. The Roswell crash occurred in 1947 at 11:30 p.m. on July the 2nd in the desert of New Mexico. There were at least 180 eyewitnesses that either saw a glowing object appear to hit the ground or saw a metallic craft with creatures laying around it that looked like hairless 10-year-old children. But a few months later, the US government were denying that this event had ever occurred and claimed that the craft was in fact a weather balloon. However, all witnesses and investigators of the crash claim that the government were just covering up the fact that it was a UFO to stop massive panic spreading across America. And over the years, people have believed that after recovering the bodies littered around the immobilized craft, the government carried out autopsies on these bodies and had the operation filmed. We've now heard from some of the world's leading experts about abductions, animal mutilations, and cover-ups. So are we any the wiser about what's been happening or not happening? We'll leave the last word to the experts and, of course, to your own thoughts.
Right there alone is the ultimate contradiction of this whole phenomenon. It has been for decades. The government says it doesn't exist. And yet, in a court of law in the United States, pages are put forth, all blacked out, in the interest of national security. If it doesn't exist, how could it be in the interest of national security?
Can you imagine saying they're out here, they can fly out, they outfly anything we have, they can, and are doing this, they are abducting people in large numbers every single day in some kind of ongoing reproductive experiment. They're tampering with memory. We have no idea what their bottom line intentions are. We'll let you know when we hear more about it. Thank you and good night. And I've always said I would rather be in the liquor business at that point than the real estate business.
Alien, stop watching it, you don't hide.